Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for October 19th, 2018. On today's episode, we're going to answer reader emails in the mailbag. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Soretta. Joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Managing Editor Jacob Hall.
Hello, hello.
Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
Writers Huai Tran Bui.
Hey, everyone.
And Chris Evangelista.
Hello.
HT, you just got off the phone. Was it the phone call interview that you were doing?
Yes, it was a phone call interview with Mamoru Hosoda.
And how did that go? Because I think people might be interested in this, because you have to, not only... See, I hate telephone interviews, because there's kind of like this, it's like trying to do an interview with a gigantic wall in between you. Yeah. And, you can't read facial expressions, you can't read body language, so there's kind of like this divide of some sort. But I would imagine it's even worse with the translator in between you.
Yeah, it was the first time I've had an experience of doing an interview through a translator. Mamoru Hosoda, for those who don't know, is a Japanese anime director. He was behind films such as The Girl Who Left Through Time, one of my all-time favorites, as well as The Boy and the Beast and Summer Wars. So I was interviewing him for his newest film, Mirai, and I had to do it through a translator who was very sweet and did her best with some of my questions that I realized didn't really work well with a person that was going through a translator, because I tend to try to load my questions with some levels, but go lead into it. If you're in a conversation, you try to lead into it. But with a translator, you have to go with the most direct option you have. So you can't say, "Oh, I really liked what you did with this scene and how it's different from the scene that you did before," et cetera, et cetera. But it just confuses. It just gets confusing when and literally lost in translation in this sense. So that was a really interesting experience for me, and having that kind of person, you have to kind of get a rapport with both the director and the translator in a sense. And then again, through the phone, it's even worse. You just kind of feel like you're in this very weird three-way call. And I'm not a fan of phone interviews either, but that's kind of inevitably what I always end up doing, because I'm in DC. I'm not near any LA and New York things, so I tend to do a lot of these, and I still don't get used to it.
Yeah, and I think you're also a very personable person, and it's very hard for personality to translate through a translator.
Oh, definitely. It's kind of like, especially with Japanese culture too. You have to think about the cultural differences sometimes too, which is hard to really keep in regard when you're just asking questions about a movie. So it was weird, but it was a really cool experience, because I really admire his work. So I think it was a good interview in the end.
I would like to share a quick story that I think you guys will appreciate. A friend of mine did a Q&A for the film The Tribe from a few years ago, which is a very bleak film with no spoken dialogue, told entirely through unsubtitled sign language. And the movie is totally readable. You can watch it and understand what's going on. But the Draft House hosted a screening of it for the local school for the deaf. So it was a bunch of deaf students and their often not deaf parents and family in the theater. So he had to do a Q&A with the filmmakers with a sign language translator. And the idea of all the nuance that HG is discussing having to be broken down into sign language made for one of the strangest Q&As I think maybe to ever happen at any movie theater.
Have you personally done any interviews through a translator, Jacob?
Yeah, the most memorable one was a few years ago. There was two Palestinian filmmakers who made a short film that put on the internet, I believe, and they were invited to come screen it in Austin. And the whole gist of it was, hey, here's filmmakers, artists from the Gaza Strip who are an area that's not always showcased for filmmakers. And it was a good short. They made it, for no money in a very dangerous area. And I remember the interview being memorable because they seemed very, very intense when they spoke. And in their language, me not being able to understand what they were saying, they always seemed very angry at me until the translation came through, and the translation was super friendly and complimentary. So I realized, this is me learning a very valuable lesson about cultural divides, which is just because a person speaking their language does not mean you can easily read their emotions or their intent. So it was a very important learning experience for me, actually.
I love in a translated interview where you're hearing the interviewee like answer in their native language, and it sounds like, you know, positive and happy, and then the translator it like ends up being like this sad story or something like just like totally different than what you expected it to be. Okay, anyways, we should get into the mailbag. Let's start with a fun one. Chris from Ohio writes in, what are your plans for Halloween? So let's start with Ben. What are your Halloween plans?
I am going to a baby shower for a friend of mine who is having they're throwing like a baby shower / costume party, and it's on the 27th. So I think that's like the Saturday before Halloween. I don't want to say what my costume is yet because I think I'm going to try to finalize it this weekend, but I'll talk about it on the mailbag. The water cooler the Monday after I go to that, just to make sure that I don't screw things up. I have high hopes for my costume. I'll tease that, and it's movie related, so we'll see what happens there.
Yeah. HT, what are you planning on doing for Hallows Eve?
So the weekend of before Halloween, I'm actually going up to New York to go to my friend's housewarming party, which sounds like a far away to go for Halloween, but I guess this is a good enough place to announce it. But I'm going to be moving to New York soon, and I'm going to be using that weekend to look at apartments and settle things and everything. So I'm going to also use that chance to go to a party, and I have a costume. No surprise for anyone here who's been listening, but it's Doctor Who. It's the 13th Doctor. I've already like bought all the elements, and I don't have the new screwdriver. I'm going to use my old 11th Doctor screwdriver, which
Wait,
I
when you
own.
say you bought the elements, like, are you buying like actual Doctor Who Halloween costume elements, or are you like putting it together yourself?
It's like the low budget version. So I the only thing I really bought was like the t-shirt and suspenders, but I already have several other things. I have a jacket as well that looks kind of similar to what she wears. And so it's kind of it's a low budget version of the 13th Doctor, but hopefully it'll be recognizable, and especially because of the t-shirt, which is like just a plain t-shirt with like a rainbow on the chest. And I have the old screwdriver, but it should be fine. So I'm excited to wear that, and or potentially use a flower crown that I bought at the Renaissance Festival a week ago, and maybe use that to cosplay as Emma from Sharp Objects. But that's a backup one, because that would be kind of cold that I'd have to wear a night dress. So that's my plans. It's very exciting.
I'm finding it very hard. I am a bigger person. I'm finding it very hard to find a Halloween costume that, one, fits me, and two, is something I'd want to wear. Like I have no problem finding something that fits me, but it's not like in terms of off the shelf. I'm not a person that likes to create, like, put the effort in. Yeah, I basically don't want to put the effort in to create my own costume. So I have a costume on the way. I got a Doc Brown costume from Back to the Future 1. So it's like him in the radiation outfit. And I think that's pretty easy and probably fits me, because Back to the Future is my favorite film. And I'm probably going to be wearing that to... we live in West Hollywood, which has one of the biggest Halloween parties in the United States, at least. It basically takes over like this 1.5 mile stretch of the main road, Santa Monica Boulevard, and we're going to be attending that. And also the Magic Castle every week for Halloween has like Halloween week is like 10 days instead of 7, and they basically do a themed event. Last year was an alien invasion. This year they're doing Murder Mansion, so it's like a murder mystery kind of thing, and they have like actors roaming the castle, and it's going to be kind of like a real life Clue, I think. So I will be Doc Brown at both of those things. But Jacob, what are your plans?
I am hitting up a few local haunted houses, as I do every year. I'll talk more in detail about them in the next water cooler episode. But tonight I'm doing House of Torment, which is the big haunted house in Austin, the one that's so popular that there aren't really many others in the immediate city. And it's sort of it's multi-million-dollar installation, 3 separate houses, has the quality and special effects and makeup of Universal Studios Horror Nights. It's a very big thing. I've gone every year for years. It's extremely polished, very well rehearsed, run like a clock, very fun. But I'm actually more excited about Scream Hollow, which is where I'm going tomorrow. And it's out in Bastrop, which is about 45 minutes from Austin. Out literally where they filmed Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Like, the gas station scenes were filmed a few minutes from where this haunted house is. And it's on a bunch of acreage out in the middle of the country where there are no street lights and dirt country roads to get you there. And it's 4 separate houses. It's a complex with a restaurant and a gift shop and a bar. And there's people wandering around, terrifying you. And it is not as polished or as slick as House of Torment. It's clearly made with a lot more spirit and hope than House of Torment is. But the actors have a lot more freedom. Everything's almost entirely outdoors, so you're in the woods with no artificial light. It is just really terrifying and special. But I'll have more details about what's new this year on Monday.
So is this more of a homegrown thing, kind of like we saw in the documentary The American Scream?
Yeah, it's bigger than those in the American Scream. It's not in somebody's backyard. It's very much its own business. It has a website running for a few years. It has a payroll for the actors. They train the actors. It's not like a super low budget thing. It's not as Hollywood as House of Torment is. But yeah, it feels very much like a passion project, pulled off extremely well as opposed to a very slick operation.
I think we mentioned this last year on the podcast, but I would highly recommend anybody who hasn't seen American Scream to check it out. It's from the director and producers of Best Worst Movie, and it kind of profiles a bunch of homegrown haunted houses that take place, I think, in New England somewhere. Yeah, I think that's probably available to rent on iTunes and Amazon. But who have we not gotten to? Oh, Chris. What are your plans for Halloween?
Well, next weekend I'm going away with my wife because it's our wedding anniversary. We got married on October 29th because, we're both fans of Halloween as a holiday. So we deliberately, yes, we deliberately set up our wedding to be right around Halloween. And so we're going away for just a weekend. And then on Halloween itself, I just basically watch as many scary movies as I possibly can. That's my annual tradition.
Is there a TV network that does how every Christmas there's 24 hours of A Christmas Story? Is there a TV network that does something like that for Halloween?
I mean, I guess those places that play Hocus Pocus and stuff like that, but that's not really
what I
want.
Yeah.
I mean, there's there's Shudder, which is not a TV channel. It's a streaming service. That's as close as I can think of.
Someone should get the rights to all the Halloween movies and then just do 24 hours of Halloween on Halloween.
AMC just recently played, I think, almost the
Marathon?
whole franchise. But
AMC used to do a thing every October where they would do 30 days of old school 30s through 60s horror movies. That's where I first discovered Universal Monsters and William Castle movies, and they did it for years and years. But then AMC stopped being a movie network, started being a TV network. But I still miss those days. But I remember vividly sitting down for hours and hours and hours and watching nothing but old school horror movies on AMC.
Yes. Okay, let's move on to our next question. I'll try to answer this the best I can. Britton from Louisville, Kentucky writes in, what's the difference between a producer and an executive producer? Do they both get Best Picture Oscars if their movie wins? From what I understand, having written about this industry for over 10 years, this is what I understand of the difference between producer and executive producer. And I'll put some details in the show notes, but executive producer is basically the top executive of operations of the film, while the producer is the manager of the operation. So what that means is the executive producer prepares the budget and acquires the investors, which is not typically true anymore, but it's whatever. And the producer makes sure how to use the budget to accomplish, the film. The producer hires the people with the right talents and skills for the movie, whereas the producer himself is hired by the executive producer. So for the most part, the executive producer has very little to do with the hiring process, aside from hiring the producer. The producer is on set for the entire production, although some films I've seen have like multiple producers, like so they'll have creative producers and technical producers. And the executive producer will come and visit from time to time, not usually on set. And they're usually more in an advisory capacity, overseeing the scripts and the marketing. And the producer is always eligible for the awards from Hollywood. On the other hand, the executive producer is not eligible for awards. And obviously, I think a lot of people know this, but executive producers sometimes more or less just a credit that someone gets for a variety of reasons, maybe being responsible for the production in some significant way. Do any of you guys have any differences I may have missed in what's the difference between a producer and an executive producer on a film?
I think you get the bulk of it. The one thing I will note, though, is executive producer means different things for television. So executive producer in TV tends to be the creative hands-on type. And so what Peter said is very comprehensive for film, but once you start branching out into small screen, it's a completely different thing.
For sure. That's usually the showrunner, right? It's the
usually.
Yeah, okay. Let's move on to Damon P. from St. Louis, Missouri. Writes in, he knows that a lot of our team reads books, and he wants to know if we believe that breaking up a film into multiple parts, like Deathly Hallows or Mockingjay, to make the book more, the movie more complete, like the book, is a good thing. So many times we hear the book is better. Why is that? Is that because the movies are limited by time to incorporate additional plot points or anything like that? What do you guys think? I'm guessing the person who reads the most books here is who? Jacob, maybe?
I imagine me or HT, but I'll chime in real quick, then I'll pass the baton to her since I've been talking too much. But I think that the splitting a book into two movies has never been a creative decision. I don't believe anybody who says that. I think it's always been a financial decision to make more money. Because Deathly Hallows and Mockingjay are books that do not demand two movies. I like both books and I like both movies, or all four movies even. But there's nothing in that narrative that demands those additional hours. I think that both of them could be improved even if they were sharper, more critical adaptations, one that knew what to pick and choose and knew what was important. I think a better adaptation is one that isolates the feeling of a book or isolates what's important and reconstructs it into a film rather than trying to laboriously recreate that feeling. Because I think that a book and a movie are so different things that trying to just say, we need more time to do more events is not as good as let's find a brisker way to recapture that feeling in a new medium. But what do you think, HT?
I actually agree with most of what you said, except for the splitting of the Deathly Hallows. Well, Mockingjay was definitely a very financial decision. Deathly Hallows actually provided a good splitting point in which they gave kind of two very different films out of this very gigantic, very dense book. And I will say Deathly Hallows Part 1 is my favorite book because it is so limited in that sense to this one adventure and this one story that we're telling. So I think that actually works, and that kind of felt like it came from both financial and creative decision. But anything that came after that, such as Mockingjay, the Hobbit trilogy, which was the dumbest splitting of a book ever, definitely felt more financial than anything. And as for that common phrase, the book is better than the movie, I don't fully believe that either. I think that people who like to spout that off often are upholding the movie to different standards than what they should. They are wanting to see their favorite parts of a book adapted and thus want that laborious, that stilted adaptation to take place, which doesn't suit movie making at all. It's something that is a very different medium. If you want something that's closer to that feeling of the book or whatever you wanted to see from a book adaptation, often a miniseries is better, and that also is a very different medium than film as well.
I kind of wish that they're like filmmakers. I know that this does not make sense, but I wish filmmakers were given the room, kind of like Peter Jackson was given on the original Lord of the Rings films, to shoot a lot more of the book and include it in a director's cut or an ultimate cut later on. Like, I would have loved to have seen more scenes in the Harry Potter films, added back into the movies. I mean, I guess as a screenwriter, you have to, cut it down to the story that you want to present on screen. But I also see that Hollywood can make money by these, ultimate cut re-releases and home video. Ben, what are your thoughts on adapting books to movies?
I mean, I kind of am of the opinion that the reason behind why a lot of people think the book is better is just as simple as sometimes the way that you imagine things does not align with the way that things actually appear, in the actual film adaptations. Like, we've seen this so many times, especially in fandom, when like fan theories pop up and people just become obsessed with building out the movie in their mind, and then when the actual movie comes out and they discover that those fan theories were just nonsense and garbage, and it doesn't align, the final movie doesn't align with that, people get really angry. So I think there's like some sort of underlying thing there that is the same, it's linked to that book is better concept.
Chris, I know you also read a bunch. Do you think splitting, making a longer movie will translate into a better adaptation?
I mean, a longer movie, if it was one movie, yes, but I don't, the splitting into two movies thing, like Jacob said, is...
You are a huge fan of Stephen King, and there is this popular adaptation of It that has taken that route.
I mean, yeah, I guess there are exceptions to the rule, but like that book really is like two distinct stories. Like that really does work as, two big stories, but if it's something that's written and it's like one, linear tale, I think splitting that is really just for the sake of, making more money, getting more films out of an idea.
By the way, it only occurred to me now, do you think after they come out with It Chapter 2, do you think they'll re-edit both of the movies together so that they cut in the way that the book does? And then re-release an ultimate long movie?
I don't think they will. I'm sure someone online will do that because that seems to happen a lot. I don't think Warner Brothers will do that. It would be cool if they did, but I don't think they would.
I don't know. Maybe there's money in it. But, okay, let's move on to Leanne R., who I think has written in the past from Los Angeles. She writes in that she's wondering what the best films directed and starring the same person. She uses examples like Tarantino and Mel Gibson. I don't know. I think when discussing this, we probably should draw a line between cameos like Alfred Hitchcock and Tarantino and, M. Night, those kind of things where it's a smaller role or a cameo, and, more of a starring role. I'll start this off with, I've really been impressed with what Ben Affleck has done, especially with The Town and Argo. Although I do feel like I would like to see him do more movies, directing more movies that he's not in. Like, I really do think that Gone Baby Gone might be his best film that he's directed so far. HT, what about you?
Well, I have to go with the classic one, Citizen Kane, which is directed by and starring Orson Welles. There's been enough said about Citizen Kane. It's a testament testament to filmmaking. It's a landmark film. Orson Welles is it was his feature debut too, so that was a really just phenomenal achievement on his part, and he gives a really nuanced performance as the titular Citizen Kane. So that's a great one. Another one is Life is Beautiful, directed by and starring Roberto Benigni. It's a just tragic and also surprisingly lighthearted film about World War II and concentration camps. And it's a really gorgeous movie.
Let's go to Chris.
Citizen Kane obviously is a big one, so I didn't add that to my list. But Unforgiven is a great one from Clint Eastwood. I think that's actually the only Clint Eastwood directed movie I really like, because he's gotten very lazy in his later years. Like, he has a very one and done mentality where he does one take of everything and that's good enough for him, and it shows. I know he still has fans, but I haven't liked really any film he's directed since Unforgiven, which is great. Another is Dick Tracy, which I love, the Warren Beatty movie, which he's in and he directed, and Do the Right Thing, where Spike Lee, he's not the main character in that, but he has a pretty big role in that. And a more recent one is A Star Is Born. I'm really impressed with that movie, especially for it being Bradley Cooper's directorial debut, and he's almost in every single scene, which is a pretty big deal. So I'll add that one to the mix too.
Jacob, you also had Citizen Kane on your list.
I actually have Citizen Kane and Unforgiven on my list. I'll chime in real quick on those. Citizen Kane is just a brilliant movie in every way. I don't need to say that because everybody knows it, hopefully. But so many performances that are as grand and bizarre and as pushing as that one is are often the result of an actor having a director to sort of catch him as he falls backwards, because he's making so many big choices that should not work and do work. So the idea that Orson Welles had the confidence to direct himself in that performance without having somebody to have his back is astonishing to me. And also Unforgiven is the kind of movie that can only be made by a filmmaker / star who really understands himself and his persona. That movie is a demythologizing of the West and the Western, but also of Clint Eastwood himself. So once you really take into account that it's Clint Eastwood directing himself as a version of a character he's played before, you start to really understand it's Clint Eastwood really evaluating himself and his career and his life so far, and that makes it so much more fascinating.
Is that you had some other films as well, right?
Oh, yeah. I'll just do a quick shout out to Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin, the old silent comedian stars from the first early years of cinema, who would do these insane stunts and wacky comedy and put themselves in Jackie Chan levels of danger, but with even fewer safety measures, while directing, while starring, and while making all their movies happen. I feel like this is from an era where directors were really seen as more of workmen than they were as artists, even though they were artists. And to understand that Buster Keaton was directing himself in scenes in movies like The General, where he's hanging off of a train and risking life for laughs, is fascinating and really makes you consider how hard directing is when you're not dangling off a train and almost dying.
Yeah. Ben, let's move on to you. What are some films directed by people starring in them?
Yeah, I would give a shout out to some of Clint Eastwood's earlier movies, The Outlaw Josie Wales and High Plains Drifter in particular. I think Pale Rider is another one. I don't like that one quite as much, but in addition to Unforgiven, I think those are worth mentioning for anybody who's looking for really solid performances from directors. And also A Quiet Place, John Krasinski's movie from earlier this year. It sort of seems insane that movie came out this year because so much has happened since then, but I think he delivers a really, really great performance in that movie, and again, as being like it's not quite his directorial debut, but it sort of feels like it. And then the Rocky sequels, I know that Stallone didn't direct the first film, but he directed most of the sequels, and those are really, entertaining, compelling sports movies. Some of them are a little bit more laughable than others, I think, but he sort of runs the gamut there between some pitfalls. Like Rocky 5, I think, is probably one of the worst there. But Rocky Balboa is really great, and I have big love for Rocky 2, 3, and 4 as well. So yeah, I got to give Stallone a shout out too.
I feel kind of stupid because I only picked one filmmaker because I thought we were each picking one filmmaker. And you guys picked so many great movies, but I think you said most of the ones that I would have said if I had a list. Let's move on to our last question because we are running out of time. But this question has to do with, this is from Drew from Houston, Texas, and he writes in, I really enjoyed the conversation about becoming a film writer. I had another question about taking that process one step further for those on the site who write reviews. What is your process? An outline before diving into the review? Does Chris take notes while reviewing TV shows or Blu-rays before writing his reviews? Just curious to hear more about the process. I'll start things off and say that if I am writing a review, like if I'm going to, generally I do most of my reviews at like Sundance or something like that. I usually have a moleskin notebook that I take notes throughout the movie, and I am really bad at it. So my notes like overlap and like, you know, go all over and they're scribbles. And literally, if I looked at the notebook a day later, I probably couldn't decipher 60% of it. But coming out of the movie and writing the review that day, even even if I'm not good. Like a lot of things come up to me during the movie, and by the time I get so invested and so into it that I forget some of these thoughts I have. And if I didn't write them down, I would forget some of the stuff. And I think it's even the process of me scribbling the thing down. It might not even be me being able to decipher that scribble later, but the fact that I made an effort to write it down, I think burns it into my brain. So when I do write the review, I have like that kind of note, more on the surface. Chris, you do a lot of reviews for us. What about you? What is your process?
Yeah, I definitely take notes no matter what I'm watching. If it's, if I'm in the theater, I bring a notebook. If I'm at home, I'll tend to take notes on my phone in like the note app because it's easier to read because, my handwriting is also a mess. But
that's another thing I do when I come out of a theater, even for like the water cooler segments that we do. When I come out of the theater, I just open my notes app and I like vomit like through words into the notes app of like just like little notes that like I want to remember for when it comes up on the air.
Yeah. It's always good to take notes, especially if you're doing like multiple things. Like if you're at a festival, it helps to take notes. Like when I was at TIFF this year, I saw like 4 or 5 movies a day, and if I didn't take notes, they would have all blended together. But it's definitely helpful. But they don't have to be. For me, at least, they don't really have to be detailed notes. Like sometimes I just write a word down and that'll be enough to trigger my memory of what I wanted to say.
I do remember hearing Roger Ebert talk about his process, and he used to have like this binder that on one side had like these little note cards, and on the other it had like just a pocket. So whenever he had a thought that he wanted to write down, this is actually pretty smart, something I probably should do because my, like I said, mine just go all into each other like deformed Tetris pieces. It's like a disaster. What he would do is take one of the note cards, write the thought down on the note card, and then put it into the pocket, so that later he has all these individual notes. Jacob, what is your process like?
I'm actually the exact opposite of you two. I take 0 notes, and my reasoning is that if I can't remember it, if it doesn't bother me, a few hours later when writing the review, it's not worth putting in the review. I always try to sit down very quietly and think about what's echoing through me now, what still bothers me, what still delights me, and I go from there. I don't outline. I tend to start with the beginning, write it all the way through, and then do a second draft where I give it a little more structure. I don't recommend not taking notes because I think most people do. It's very rare for people in my profession to not take notes. But for me, that's what has worked for me over the years.
See, my notes won't even just be criticisms or positive. It might be like a plot point that I know I want to address, or maybe it's, something that came to me during the movie, a clever way to describe something or compare something to something. And, yeah. So, Ben, how about you?
I'm pretty much the same as you, Peter. I take notes pretty much in every movie that I go to, and I write down a lot of the same stuff. I'll write down like thematic things that I think about that I might forget later, because a lot of times as you're watching a movie, I'll have a thought like, oh, that connects back to something that happened before, but it's still early in the movie, so I don't know if that's ultimately what the film is trying to say, but that's a lot of the kind of stuff that I write. And I write a ton of plot points as well, because a lot of times for the movies that we're seeing them so early that full detailed plot synopses are not available online anywhere else yet. So I really write a ton of plot stuff down just to make sure I have the order right of when things happen, and that will trigger the smaller moments. I'll write down a lot of lines of dialogue, things that jump out at me, or just little comparisons or references that I think might be made to other movies. But yeah, it's super helpful for me. And in terms of like the actual writing, I tend to write the whole thing all the way through from the beginning. I know a lot of people, or I've heard a lot of people talk about how they can't write the intro and the outro until after the whole rest of the thing is done, and that's sort of I can understand that, but I just I find it easier for me to just start at the beginning and go all the way through. So that's my process.
Yeah, you do make a good point with all these like very early film festival films. They usually have a little blurb written by the programmer that sometimes doesn't tell you much at all about the film. And, later when a film's released, I'm not sure if people out there listening to this know this, but usually we'll get access to press notes, which is like, somewhere between 5 to 30 pages written about the film, giving you some insight into the making of the film, but also giving you a plot synopsis to kind of work off of. So, yeah, it is at these film festivals, I am like writing a bunch of notes on like, the plot notes that I want to address in my recap of what happens in the movie. And it's actually kind of funny because it's kind of notorious that if you read a lot of these like film festival reviews later when the movie comes to release, there are a lot of discrepancies. And I'm not talking about just mine, but even like famous reviewers have gotten things wrong.
Well, it's interesting because I love reading Roger Ebert's reviews, but Roger Ebert, he did the bulk of his reviewing before there was internet. So if you go back and read a lot of his reviews, there's a lot of times where he gets things really wrong because there was no way for him to really look it up. I remember specifically the review he wrote for Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. He mistakenly thought there was a scene where someone was doing an autopsy on Michael Myers, even though Michael Myers, we all know, is famously not in Halloween 3, but that's in his Halloween 3 review because he had no way of really confirming it back then.
HT, how about you? What is your process?
Yeah, I'm a note taker like you guys. When I go to see a movie and I am reviewing it, I tend to take a notebook in and jot down just my thoughts. Sometimes lines of dialogue like Ben as well, in case I want to go back to it or use it in my review. If I have a thought of how I want to sometimes I have a thought of how I want to word something, and I already have my lead, then I just write that down, and it helps me get started with the review later on. And at home as well, I tend to use my notes app. We're the only ones who use the notes app as it's supposed to be used, unlike celebrities who use it for statements and stuff. Yeah. But so I'm a big note taker, just mostly the kind of thoughts that come to me when I'm watching a movie or TV show. And as for writing a review, I'm also the start to finish person. Sometimes if I'm stuck, I will skip my lead, but I tend to like using my lead as a jumping off point, as the kind of way to find what I want to say, my thesis in a way. But sometimes in longer essays, I do little outlines by subheads and things to kind of divide my thoughts, which help me order things around.
Yeah, I like to do subheads. I also, while I'm watching a film, and it sounds like I'm the only one here that does this, but I'm always trying to figure out what, the review headline is. I'm trying to figure if that helps inform my entire structure of the review, because especially at a film festival, and I know we've talked about this when covering film festivals as a staff, but these are films that people don't know about. There hasn't been trailers for most of these films. There haven't been posters or even photos sometimes. So you got to find an angle that will get people to care if it's a movie that we're writing about and should be on people's radar. So, I mean, that could be in the form of comparing it to another film that people like or know of. It could be, finding, what is the essence of this thing that I want people to get people interested in. And I usually am able to scribble something down during the movie that helps like kind of inform my whole review. But it sounds like you guys don't, you come to that later while you're writing the review?
Yeah, headline's probably the last thing that I think of, and I'm really hit or miss when it comes to headlines. I'm not as good as you are about finding that one angle that people care about. I think you have more practice with SEO and everything too.
Well, it's not SEO. It's more of like, I need to get people to care about this. Like, we just spent 2 hours watching it. I spent an hour going to the theater, an hour coming back, a couple hours writing, an hour writing this, whatever. I want people to actually care about what I wrote. And if this movie's good, I want people to actually care about the movie. So I need to find some way to get them to care. Ben, Chris, Jacob, do you guys, you come to that later, or?
My thought is very brief, which is, as the managing editor, I've rewritten a lot of headlines because I feel like once I've read your review, I sometimes have a better idea of what you're trying to say than maybe you do. So I think headlines written by somebody else who's read your work are sometimes better than your own headlines, and that's why editors exist. But go on, Chris, please.
No, yeah, I always come to the headline usually last, unless it's like a really terrible movie. Then I usually think that, like, when I saw Ready Player One, which I just hated, I immediately knew my headline was going to be, "This is Steven Spielberg's worst movie," which it was, and then everyone online yelled at me, but I stand by it.
But you did get a lot of people looking at that article.
Yeah, see, it worked.
Hyperbolic statements get reads.
I come to, unless it's for news articles and stuff, I'll do the headline first. But for reviews, I almost always do it at the end. I think it's because when I first got started writing, I would just write reviews on like my own blog, and I wouldn't have a headline. It would just be the name of the movie was the name of the blog post. So I never had to think about it in those early days of like muscle memory, writing reviews and stuff. So I come to that at the end.
So I think the lesson today, guys, is that we all take notes except for Jacob, and his writing is better than ours. So maybe
this
is
not
true.
Notes.
That's not true.
So we should stop taking notes, right? No. Okay, that brings us to the end of today's podcast. We have too many people on this podcast to go through the whole roster, but if you want to find more of all of our work, you can find it at slashfilm.com. Slashfilm Daily, this podcast is published every weekday on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. If you have a question for the mailbag, or you just have feedback, comments, concerns, you can send them to peter@slashfilm.com. And please leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention the email on the air like we did with all of these emails today. And please go to our iTunes page, write out a paragraph review, a 5-star review, tell your friends, spread the word, and we'll see you on Monday.